it's an illusion. It's pushing the rational part of your brain out of the picture and forcing you to rely solely on your emotions.
We live in a world obsessed with low prices. We celebrate bargains, discount codes, and affordable products. From smartphones to fast fashion, from plastic trinkets to processed food. We've convinced ourselves that cheap is good. But what if I told you that those low prices are almost never what they appear to be?
So the point is, although coupons are meant to save you money, they actually make you spend more. Researchers show that coupon users either buy things they don't need, or they buy too much of the things they do need.
That the price you pay at the register is often only a fraction of the true cost of production, and that the rest, the hidden costs, are paid by everyone else, the environment, future generations, society at large. Economists call these hidden costs externalities. An externality occurs when the production or consumption of a good affects someone who is not directly involved in the transaction. In other words, you buy something cheap, but someone else, somewhere else, pays the price. And in our globalized economy, those costs can be staggering. Take a t-shirt, for example. You might buy one for $10. It seems like a small, harmless purchase. But that $10 does not account for the water used to grow cotton, the pesticides applied to the fields, the toxic dyes dumped into rivers, or the low wages of the factory workers in Bangladesh. It doesn't include the long-term environmental damage caused by microplastics in synthetic fabrics, nor the transportation emissions from shipping that shirt halfway across the world. The $10 is just the tip of the iceberg. Externalities can be positive too. For instance, a beekeeper's bees pollinating a nearby orchard benefits the farmer, even if the farmer pays nothing for the service. But negative externalities are far more common and far more destructive, especially in industries driven by profit rather than responsibility. Let's look at one of the biggest sources of negative externalities in modern life: industrial agriculture. Modern farming has dramatically increased food production, lowered costs, and fed billions of people. That's the good part. But it comes with enormous hidden costs. Fertilizers wash into rivers, causing dead zones where aquatic life cannot survive. Pesticides poison insects, including pollinators, essential to global food production. Monoculture depletes soil nutrients, leaving land less fertile for future generations. And livestock farming produces methane, a greenhouse gas many times more potent than CO2. All these costs are largely invisible in the price of a burger, a loaf of bread, or a carton of milk. When we enjoy cheap food, the public pays in the form of climate change, degraded ecosystems, and healthcare costs from pollution-related diseases. In other words, the system externalizes the true cost, making it invisible to consumers while still making it very real. Energy is another classic example. Fossil fuels power our cars, homes, and factories, and they are cheap in terms of what we pay at the pump or on our electricity bill. But the extraction, transportation, and burning of coal, oil, and gas has profound social and environmental consequences. Oil spills, air pollution, climate change, and geopolitical conflicts over resources. Consumers think they're buying energy at a fair price, but society is paying a massive hidden bill. Even global supply chains are riddled with externalities. A smartphone may cost $800, but that price does not account for cobalt mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo, often performed under hazardous conditions by child laborers. It doesn't account for electronic waste piling up in landfills in developing countries. It doesn't include the environmental damage caused by shipping components across oceans. The cheap goods we enjoy in one part of the world are subsidized by exploitation and environmental degradation elsewhere. So why do externalities exist? The answer is surprisingly simple. Markets do not automatically account for costs imposed on others. When a business produces something, it considers its own costs: labor, materials, equipment, overhead, but rarely the broader social or environmental costs. Why would it? There's no financial incentive. In fact, ignoring external costs often increases profit, which is why externalities are so common in for-profit industries. Economists have long recognized this problem. One of the earliest examples comes from the 19th century, when factories in industrial cities routinely dumped waste into rivers. Downstream communities had to deal with polluted water, disease, and death, but the factory owners never paid for it. Economists call this an externality and argued that it represented a market failure, a situation where the free market does not allocate resources efficiently or fairly. Externalities are not just historical, they are everywhere in the modern economy. Plastic pollution, climate change, urban congestion, overfishing, deforestation, chemical pollution, noise, and even social harms like gentrification and labor exploitation are all forms of externalities. They are consequences of a system where prices are detached from reality, where the market does not account for the broader costs imposed on society. What makes this problem worse is scale. In the past, externalities were mostly local. A river polluted by a nearby factory, a field stripped of nutrients by overfarming. Today, thanks to globalization, supply chains span the planet. Emissions in one city contribute to climate disasters in another. Deforestation in South America affects rainfall and food production in Africa and Asia. Cheap consumer goods in one country come at the expense of environmental collapse elsewhere. There is also a temporal dimension. Externalities often affect future generations who had no say in today's purchases. Climate change is the most obvious example. Burning fossil fuels today generates profit and convenience. But the consequences, rising sea levels, extreme weather, mass migration, and agricultural disruption, will mostly fall on people who are not yet born. In economic terms, these are called intergenerational externalities, and they pose one of the most difficult challenges for modern economies. After all, markets are designed for immediate transactions, not long-term consequences. So how can societies deal with externalities? Economists propose a few solutions, and each come with trade-offs. The most well-known is the Pigovian tax, named after economist Arthur Pigot. A Pigovian tax is a tax levied on any activity that generates negative externalities, with the goal of internalizing the cost. For example, a carbon tax puts a price on carbon emissions, forcing companies to account for the environmental damage of burning fossil fuels. In theory, this aligns private incentives with social costs. Polluters pay for the harm they cause, and consumers see prices that reflect the true cost of goods. Regulation is another approach. Governments can set limits on pollution, mandate safe working conditions, require recycling, or ban harmful substances. Regulation essentially forces businesses to internalize some of the external costs. Critics argue that regulation can be inefficient or overly bureaucratic, but without it, markets frequently fail to account for social harm. Markets themselves sometimes develop mechanisms to reduce externalities voluntarily, but this is rare and usually limited to areas where consumers can directly observe harm. Organic labeling, fair trade certification, and green technology adoption are examples. But these voluntary mechanisms are small compared to the scale of global externalities. Most companies do not voluntarily take responsibility for environmental destruction, labor exploitation, or systemic social harm unless forced by law or consumer pressure. Externalities also reveal an uncomfortable truth about the low-cost lifestyle we prize. Buying cheap goods often means someone else pays the price. And sometimes the price is devastating. It may be a farmer exposed to toxic chemicals, a community flooded by industrial waste, a child laborer mining rare metals, or our collective climate future. What appears as savings at the checkout is often deferred social, environmental, and economic costs. And these hidden costs are not even distributed. Wealthier nations often externalize costs onto poorer nations, exploiting labor, natural resources, and environmental space that are less protected. Understanding externalities also changes how we think about economic growth. Traditional measures like GDP focus on production and consumption, without accounting for social or environmental costs. A factory that pollutes a river may boost GDP through increased production, but the societal costs of water pollution, health problems, and ecosystem collapse are ignored. From a broader perspective, that growth is illusory. Externalities are not inevitable. They are the result of choices, political, economic, and social. We choose to prioritize short-term profits over long-term sustainability. We choose to ignore harm inflicted on others in favor of convenience. We choose a market logic that treats external costs as irrelevant. And we choose a system that rewards externalizing costs while punishing responsibility. But awareness is the first step toward change. By understanding that every cheap product carries a hidden price, in the end, externalities reveal a simple but uncomfortable truth. The price tag you see is rarely the price you pay. There's always a cost somewhere, often borne by others or by the planet itself. Recognizing this is not just an economic lesson, it's a moral one. Every time we choose cheap over responsible, we participate in a system that hides the human and environmental consequences of our consumption. And every time we demand accountability, transparency, and sustainability, we push that system closer to fairness. If we truly want a world where goods are affordable and sustainable, we must start by asking a single question before every purchase. Who is paying the real cost? Because the reality is clear. Cheap is never free.